So picture this. You're walking through a museum. You see the paintings, the sculptures, the little placards with the artists' names. You see the critics. You see other people just kind of looking around. Everything feels, well, it feels pretty visible, right? It's a world of stuff and people and opinions.
But have you ever really stopped and wondered what's the secret sauce? What actually decides that one thing is a priceless masterpiece and, something else is just paint on a canvas? Well, let's get into it, because the real answer is probably not what you're thinking.
You might immediately think, oh, it's the artist, or maybe some super powerful critic, or a bunch of museum curators who all agree. But here's the thing, no single person or even group of people really holds that power.
What's really running the show is this invisible social machine. It's like an operating system for culture that quietly decides what we even get to talk about as art. And today, we're going to pull back that curtain and really deconstruct how this incredibly powerful system actually works.
All right, to crack this case, we have to start with the first and honestly the most important clue. And that's this huge separation between what's happening inside your own head and what's happening out in the world. So on one side, you've got what we'll call the psychic system. That's your private, totally sealed-off universe of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Nobody can just plug into your brain and see what you see. Then, on the other side, you've got the social system of art, and that's just a public conversation. It's made only of communication, things like art reviews, auction prices, museum labels. And here's the absolute kicker. Just like your mind, this social system is also totally closed off.
Think about it like this. Let's say you're looking at a big, red painting. Your actual experience of the color red is a private event happening completely inside your own consciousness. The art world, that social system, it can't feel that. It can't access it. All it can do is process communications about the color red. Your thought never actually becomes the communication, and the communication never becomes your thought. They are two totally different, totally incompatible worlds.
And this quote right here, it just nails it. The art world runs on itself. An art review is responding to a gallery show, which was announced in a press release, which was prompted by an artist's statement. You see, it's this endless self-referential loop. The system doesn't need our private thoughts to keep chugging along. It just needs the last piece of communication to create the next one.
Now, there's a pretty cool term for this whole phenomenon, autopoiesis. It sounds super academic, I know, but it really just means self-creating. The art world is an autopoietic system. It's a conversation that's been having itself for centuries, constantly spitting out new communications from old ones, and redefining what art even is as it goes, all on its own terms.
Okay, so if there's this massive system running all around us, why on earth can't we see it? Well, it turns out the very act of being a part of it is exactly what keeps it hidden from us.
Every single time we observe something, we're performing this little three-step operation. First, we grab a distinction, a pair of opposites like art versus kitsch or maybe original versus copy. Then we use that distinction to point at one side to say, okay, this thing here, that's art. But in that exact moment, the tool we just used, the distinction itself, poof, it just vanishes from view.
The best way to think about it is like wearing glasses. Your brain is so smart that it tunes them out so you can see the world through them, not spend all day looking at the frames. Well, distinctions work the exact same way. When you're busy deciding if a painting is innovative, you're not sitting there thinking about the abstract concept of innovative versus derivative. That distinction is the invisible lens that the art system handed you to see with in the first place.
And that's the paradox, isn't it? You can't use a tool and examine that same tool in the exact same moment. To see the distinction you're using, you'd have to use a different distinction, which would then, of course, become invisible itself. It's a perpetual blind spot. The system stays hidden because we're just too busy using its tools to ever stop and look at the tools themselves.
So this brings us to two totally different ways of seeing things. When you ask, is this particular piece of art innovative, you're doing what's called a first-order observation. You are in the system. You're playing the game by its rules. But when you step back and you ask, hang on a second, how does this system even define the word innovative to begin with? Now you're doing second-order observation. You're not looking at the art anymore. You're observing how other people observe the art. And that is the key to finally seeing the system itself. So we've got this impersonal, self-running system just doing its thing. But let's be honest, that doesn't sound very romantic or exciting, does it? So to hide its cold, hard logic, the system came up with the absolute perfect cover story, the myth of the lone genius.
This is the big problem the system has to solve for itself. I mean, if it's just a conversation repeating the same old stuff, it would get boring really fast and just die out. It has this insatiable hunger for novelty.
The system absolutely has to have things that seem new and unique and honestly highly improbable. And artwork has to feel like a one-in-a-million kind of creation to even be interesting enough for people to talk about. But where does all this constant, unlikely newness come from? How does a closed system suddenly explain these things that have never been seen before?
The answer is so brilliant, and it's so simple. The system just invented a story, a little self-description, to explain away this problem. And that story is the genius.
See, instead of trying to explain its own complex internal need for new combinations of forms and ideas, it's just so much easier to say, oh, it came from the mysterious inner world of this once-in-a-generation talent. The genius becomes the magical source of all the improbable stuff. This story takes the system's cold, impersonal need for novelty and pins it on a very personal, very romantic, and way more compelling idea: individual inspiration.
Okay, so we have journeyed deep into the hidden architecture of the art world. We've found the invisible operating system, we've uncovered its blind spot, and we've decoded its favorite cover story. So what's the big takeaway from all this?
Let's just wrap it all up. First, the art world is a self-sustaining conversation, and it's totally separate from anyone's private thoughts. Second, it hides in plain sight because the very tools we use to be a part of it, those distinctions like art versus kitsch, they become invisible the moment we use them. Third, that popular idea of the genius is just the system's really elegant way of explaining its own relentless demand for newness. And finally, the only way to see any of this is to stop looking at the art and start looking at the rules of the game.
And here's what's so powerful about this way of thinking. It doesn't just apply to art, not at all. This is an analytical lens you can use literally anywhere. Think about politics or science or business. Heck, even your own social circles. They are all systems of communication. They all have their own invisible rules, their own blind spots, and their own convenient stories they tell about themselves.
So, the next time you find yourself in a situation where the rules seem completely unspoken but are also rigidly enforced, ask yourself, what's the distinction being used here? What's in the blind spot? And what's the cover story? Because once you learn how to see one system, trust me, you start seeing them everywhere.